Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. We'll get started in just a few minutes as people continue to join. In the meantime, I have a quiz up here, so take some time to answer that. The question is, this year, 2024, marks the 60th anniversary of what major environmental law? Options are the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, the Wilderness Act, the Clean Water Act, or the Endangered Species Act. So we'll give it just a couple minutes, give it your best guess. For those who are just joining, we have a little quiz up here. We'll leave it up for another minute, so feel free to answer it, and we'll see what the answer is soon. All right, I'll give it another 10 seconds, and then we'll get started. All right, let's see how you did. So again, the question this year, 2024, marks the 60th anniversary of what major environmental law? We got a lot of different answers. Yeah, every single one got some answers. The correct answer is the Wilderness Act, which was passed in 1964, 60 years ago this year. So good job to everyone who participated, got the Wilderness Act correct. And give me a second and we'll get into it. All right, thank you all so much for joining this evening. My name is Sammy Godlove. I'm the Central Oregon Field Coordinator for Oregon Wild. And we have a lot to get to tonight, so I'm going to try and keep this intro as short as I can so we can jump straight into it. But I do have a few quick housekeeping items to go over. First, thank you to those who purchased raffle tickets this evening. The winners will be notified via email within the next couple of days. And then, as always, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A for our panelists at the end. To ask a question, just use that Q&A function that you should see either at the top or bottom of your screen. And then you can just type in your question and submit it. And please feel free to just enter your questions at any point during the presentation tonight as they come up. And we should have 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So tonight we are giving some updates and talking about the future of campaigns to protect some of Oregon's iconic landscapes. Unfortunately, we can't really have this conversation without at least briefly discussing the recent election results and what they mean for public lands. Spoiler, they don't mean a lot of good things for public lands. We're likely to see a lot of threats to some of these special places that we care about over the coming months and years. But I promise this is not a total doom and gloom webcast. There are some opportunities, both in the near and the long term, to protect public lands and protect some of these iconic landscapes. And that's kind of what we'll be talking about tonight. So in the near term, we're in what's called the lame duck session right now. It's this period of time between the election and when the new Congress and new administration take office in January. And this will be a really critical time to advance some of these public lands initiatives, get some of this stuff done. There are some rumors circulating out of DC about a potential public lands package that could come together during this lame duck session. And that could include a number of different public lands related bills from all across the country. This is all pretty speculative at the moment. We're unsure exactly what could be included in that package, or even if a package will come together. But tonight we're going to focus in on a few of the bills that could and should be included in any public lands package that does come together before the end of the year. We're also going to look at what the next few years will look like for public lands in Oregon and some of these landscapes that we're going to be talking about. What are the threats? What are the opportunities? And we have three amazing speakers tonight to discuss that. Our first speaker is Mark Salvo of the Oregon Natural Desert Association. Mark is the conservation director for ONDA, and he will be talking all about the Owyhee Canyonlands. So I will pass it off to Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Sammy, and you can hear me okay? And you can advance to the next slide if you wish. And thank you, Oregon Wild. And for all of you attending our presentation tonight, my name is Mark Salvo. I work at Oregon Natural Desert Association. We are a close partner to Oregon Wild, focused on conserving Oregon's expansive and irreplaceable high desert. And that includes Oregon's Owyhee Canyonlands, as Sammy mentioned. I'm going to race through my presentation because I have a lot to say and only 10 minutes to say it. And there have been some really interesting developments in our 5, 10, or 50, or even 100-year campaign to protect this landscape, just depending on which where you want to set your starting point. ONDA, to be sure, founded more than 35 years ago, has been intensely focused on conserving this landscape and heavily involved in a couple of different campaigns over the last decade to finally provide permanent protection to the Owyhee Canyonlands. So the Owyhee Canyonlands, as you can see on this opening map on this first slide, is in the far southeastern corner of the state of Oregon. Slide, please, Sammy. Hold on, everyone. There might be a touch of a delay.
Hang on. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go.
Okay, thank you very much. And in fact, the Owyhee, defined by, and named by the Owyhee River, the watershed itself is 11,000 square miles. So even Oregon's Owyhee is only a portion of what is a much larger, intact, largely roadless, wild region that covers portions of southeastern Oregon, southwestern Idaho, and north central Nevada. And yet, dare I say, Oregon's part of the Owyhee, in many ways, is one of the most impressive parts of this landscape. Slide, please. There are millions of acres of wilderness quality public lands in Oregon's Owyhee Canyonlands. In fact, the Bureau of Land Management has recognized 2.5 million acres of wilderness quality lands in the Owyhee. Slide, please. They are original homelands and are still used, revered, and managed by Northern Paiute, Shoshone, and Bannock peoples, and since time immemorial. There are more than 500 miles of desert rivers and waterways in the Owyhee Canyonlands, and more than 100 miles of federally designated wild and scenic rivers on this landscape. Slide, please. Now, the Canyonlands are not the only part of what we call Oregon's Owyhee Canyonlands. There are, in fact, expansive uplands, sagebrush steppe dotted with incredibly important riparian zones, aspen galleries, even remnant forests of pine, ponderosa pine on this landscape. And it really is an incredibly diverse and hugely important landscape for fish and wildlife. Slide, please. And some of those fish and wildlife are some of the iconic desert species you might already be aware of. Pronghorn and greater sage-grouse, of course, golden eagle, and just oodles of other species of raptors. 26 endemic plants occur in Oregon's Owyhee Canyonlands. It is a connected and climate resilient habitat, one worthy of the highest level of federal protection. Slide, please. Oh, and not to be forgotten, the Owyhee Canyonlands offer some of the darkest night skies in the lower 48 states. If you look at the little inset map here of sort of a generally described dark sky values in the lower 48, you'll see that the Owyhee Canyonlands in that tri-state area rank among the darkest in the lower 48, and frankly, probably in the country and in North America more generally. That's due to the fact that in Oregon's Owyhee Canyonlands, there are hardly a handful of paved roads, maybe a few gravel roads, but it is otherwise one of the most remote regions in the lower 48 remaining. Unfortunately, and despite its remoteness, the Owyhee Canyonlands is threatened by various industrial development. Cultural resources are in danger of vandalism and theft. And in fact, this is a landscape that is enjoyed by an increasing number of adventurers, including from Idaho. The Owyhee Canyonlands, much of the Owyhee Canyonlands are only 90 minutes away from downtown Boise, a thriving and growing metropolis in the state next door. And so even recreation is something that needs to be managed better in the Owyhee Canyonlands to preserve all the values on this landscape. Slide, please. Now, as I mentioned before, the Owyhee Canyonlands campaign, the various campaigns to conserve this place have extended back decades. And in fact, there was a government report 100 years ago promoting permanent protection for the Owyhee Canyonlands. Fortunately, there is still much of a landscape remaining with all the different values intact for us to protect right now. ONDA has been involved with, especially involved with the latest efforts, if you will, to protect this landscape since 2014, when a national monument campaign was launched, and then more recently in 2019, when Senator Wyden convened different interests at a roundtable to discuss the future of this landscape. And then again in 2022, when ONDA and partner organizations, including Oregon Wild, launched a major effort again to designate this landscape as a national monument. And more about why there's both a legislative and a national monument campaign underway in just a moment. Slide, please. So, as I mentioned, Senator Wyden has developed a legislative proposal to protect the Owyhee Canyonlands that include a key component to provide for the long-term security and future of this landscape, protecting more than 1.1 million acres of habitat and wilderness quality lands, conveying 30,000 acres of the most sacred lands and resources to the Burns-Paiute tribe for their stewardship, developing a program to ensure that public lands livestock grazing does conserve all the different values and resources found on these lands, and establishing a consensus-based group to help provide advice, feedback, support, resources for managing these public lands, waters, and wildlife for future generations. It's a great proposal. We like it. But a national monument designation can provide for almost all of those same things. And as you'll see here in this simple equation, a national monument proposal was little more than the same map that Senator Wyden in his process helped to develop, plus a proclamation issued by the current sitting president, who, remember, is still there till January 21, I think. And suddenly you have an Owyhee Canyonlands National Monument. So Oregon Natural Desert Association, Oregon Wild, and more than 24 other organizations launched a national monument campaign as an alternative to Senator Wyden's legislative proposal should Congress break down, fall apart, or experience its usual gridlock and not pass the Senator Wyden's Owyhee Canyonlands legislation before the end of the year. Slide, please. But this brings us up to current, and I do mean this week. Senator Wyden's legislative proposal has now been joined by a counter proposal. This one made by Representative Cliff Bentz. Cliff Bentz, of course, represents Oregon's 2nd district, a huge district in eastern Oregon, southern Oregon, extends literally from Mount Hood to the coast, down where Michael lives, and all the way over across to Idaho and down to Nevada, including all of Oregon's Owyhee Canyonlands. His proposal was not the same as Senator Wyden's. It would not protect as much wilderness. It would not provide for tribal needs. It would prioritize livestock grazing on these public lands, and it would prohibit Congress or the president from further protecting public lands within the Owyhee Canyonlands in the future. So his bill basically says, let's do these 900,000 acres, not 1.1 million acres of wilderness areas, and then let's not return to this landscape ever again. This is not a bill that Oregon National Desert Association nor any of our partners can support. And in fact, we were in Congress in Washington, D.C. this week testifying in opposition to Representative Bentz's bill and promoting the compromise consensus-based approach that Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley as his co-sponsor have proposed in the Senate. As Sammy said, we are hopeful that, and we believe that there might be a federal public lands package assembled during this lame duck Congress that could include Senator Wyden's Owyhee Canyonlands legislation, and frankly, none of the proposal that Representative Bentz has offered. But this is a strange time in Washington, D.C., as every lame duck session is, but especially now for reasons that you can imagine. And so we are literally watching day by day, week by week, engaged with decision makers in Washington, working with our coalitions on both the legislative and the national monument campaigns, and pushing for the potential permanent protection of the Owyhee Canyonlands, either before the end of this year when Congress adjourns or by January 21 when President Biden hangs up his spurs. Thank you very much, Sammy, and I'm looking forward to passing off the presentation here to any number of Chandra or Michael.
All right, thanks, Mark. We're gonna go to Michael next. So Michael Dotson is the Executive Director of KS Wild. He will be talking about several different bills from down in Southwest Oregon.
Yeah, thanks, Sammy and Mark.
Take it away, Michael.
Good to meet everyone. My name is Michael Dotson. I'm the Executive Director at the Klamath-Siskiyou Wildlands Center. Our headquarters is based in Ashland, but we cover approximately about 8 million acres of federal forest land and other public lands in Southwest Oregon and Northwest California. I'll talk today a little bit about some of the work KS Wild's been doing over the last decade plus. These are definitely campaigns that we're not working alone on. We've got a lot of partners down here. We'll talk about a few of them as we do this. But just maybe to share a little bit, this is one of my favorite spots in the Wild Rogue Wilderness down there on the Wild and Scenic River. It's an area called Hanging Rock where you hike off the river and up to this beautiful viewpoint. And what you're looking at from this perspective is a big chunk of Western Oregon Bureau of Land Management ONC lands. Next slide, Sammy. As I mentioned to you all, if you're not familiar with KS Wild, Klamath-Siskiyou Wildlands Center, we're an advocate for the forests, waters, and wildlife of this bioregion. We work closely with folks like Sammy and his colleagues and Chandra at Oregon Wild. We do a lot of forest watch, forest defense, holding the BLM accountable when it comes to planting timber sales. The map you all see in front of you right now is an interesting outline, but about the top third of that is Southwest Oregon, and then the lower third moves into Northwest California. So the area where we work is the Rogue River watershed, which is a coastal watershed. Here, along with other waterways like the Chetco, the Illinois is a tributary to the Rogue, the Winchuck, those are waterways that we look after. in Southwest Oregon. And then on the California side, that's the Klamath River watershed, the Smith River watershed. As many of you might be hearing, not far from Ashland, we have right now the largest dam removal project in the country with the Klamath dams coming out. So a lot of exciting things for rivers happening down here in our area. Next slide, Sammy. I'm going to talk to you all tonight a little bit about a few bills, kind of like what Mark was doing. Mark was talking about legislation and a monument. We've got a few pieces of legislation down here, some of which intersect, and they also intersect with what Sammy will talk about a little bit later with the River Democracy Act and the Wild and Scenic Rivers Bill. But first, I'll talk to you all about what's front and center right now in this lame duck. And that's one of the bills sitting there in the Senate called the Oregon Recreation Enhancement Act. This is a bill that was cobbled together a few years ago after the last public lands package. And it contains provisions for watersheds down here, the Wild and Scenic Rogue, the North Fork Smith River, Rough and Ready Creek, which is a headwater to the Illinois River, and then Hunter Creek and Pistol River, which is over on the Curry County coast. These watersheds for the last several decades have been threatened by a number of things. In the instance of the Rogue River, it was probably 15 years ago that the Kelsey Whiskey timber sale was proposed, not far from where you launch on the Wild and Scenic Rogue. And that timber sale really caught our attention. And so from that, 15 years ago, we launched what was then the Wild Rogue Wilderness Expansion campaign to expand the Wild Rogue further east from where it is now. In other places like the North Fork Smith, Rough and Ready Creek, and Hunter Creek, they're threatened by mining, and they've been threatened for quite some time. Campaigns date back to the 1980s, early 90s, where there were nickel mine and mining threats on both sides of the Oregon and California border. And fortunately, some protections came for the California side, but places like the North Fork Smith and Rough and Ready Creek have long been targets of mining speculation over the years. And there are some renewed threats that are causing some concerns. And so getting this bill done is really important right now for us. This picture you see, just so folks know, that was a view of Mule Creek Canyon on the Wild Rogue. There are three main provisions that we talk about when it comes to the Oregon Recreation Enhancement Act. And one of the main provisions does have a lot to do with recreation. Many of you might know the Wild Rogue because you've rafted down here or paddled. Maybe you've hiked the National Historic Trail, a beautiful through hike through the Wild and Scenic Corridor. But one of the provisions in the OR Act establishes the Rogue Canyon National Recreation Area across Medford Bureau of Land Management lands. If you look at that map on the right side, you'll see that there's sort of an inside bright red pink border. And that bigger border is the National Recreation Area Act boundary. And within that zone, you can also see the bright pink colored in, and that would be the expansion of the Wild Rogue. To the west of that pink is the existing wilderness. And so the new wilderness expansion would add about 58,000 acres. And it would encompass all of the Wild Rogue, the historic trail that folks hike today. The last piece of the OR Act is vital for some of those tributaries and watersheds away from the Rogue. Rough and Ready Creek, North Fork Smith, Pistol River, Hunter Creek. And it's called a mineral withdrawal. And it's a funny term, but ultimately what a mineral withdrawal does is it permanently restricts mining in those watersheds to where it can't happen. And so they're withdrawn from mineral entry. And all in all, that mining withdrawal is about 101,000 acres. So with this bill, we're looking at more than 200,000 acres of public land in Southwest Oregon having some form of permanent protection, which is a big deal for these landscapes down here. Next slide, Sammy. I wanted to focus a little bit. It looks like my picture didn't show up, but I wanted to focus a little bit of the OR Act on this mining withdrawal because it's often been off on its own in other areas. As an example, not only is this Southwest Oregon Watershed and Salmon Protection Act a part of Senator Wyden's OR Act bill, Representative Val Hoyle has also championed the cause. She's taken over for what was Peter DeFazio being an advocate for these waterways. And her bill is 5004. So this is one of those bills we're looking at very closely at the end of the year because it has a huge impact on the potential to restrict further mining speculation. There is a new company that is formed down here that is starting to look at various mining sites from Curry, Josephine, and Jackson County that would definitely put water quality and biodiversity habitat at risk. Some of these watersheds are just truly special, like, for example, Rough and Ready Creek, often designated as one of the most botanically diverse watersheds in all of the state of Oregon. No place for a mine. Adjacent and west of there is the North Fork Smith River in Curry County. And if you've been to like Gold Beach and the little small community of Hunter Creek, that's where the Pistol River and Hunter Creek areas are located. And there's also mining threats over there. So that really encompasses what, KS Wild has been heavily focused on these last few years. It has received, the OR Act has received bipartisan support in the Senate E&R committee. And it's also being introduced by Val Hoyle in the House. So we do think it's one of those bills that meets the criteria for bipartisan support. The next bill I wanted to talk to you all about, there is another subsequent bill down here that is focused solely on the Smith River watershed. There's definitely some overlap with the mineral withdrawal, but what the Smith River National Recreation Area Expansion Act does is it brings all of the Smith River watershed under a recreation area, which currently exists on the California side. So Senator Merkley's bill expands the Smith River National Recreation Area into Oregon, about 55,000 acres in Oregon in the North Fork Smith. It has mineral withdrawal provisions, and it also includes 75 miles of new wild and scenic tributaries. I know Sammy will talk more about wild and scenic beyond the Smith when he talks about the RDA, but along with Senator Merkley's bill, Representative Hoyle has also been advocating for this, and her bill is 6595 on the House side. Next slide. Couple things I just wanted to end with, just because of other iconic landscapes that really are important to KS Wild and other partners down here. All of these things, especially with the mineral withdrawal bill, we work with partners like Friends of the Kalmiopsis Audubon. We also have partners that work in landscapes with the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. There's the Soda Mountain Wilderness Council, who's close with us. And just want to let everyone know that, whatever happens here at year end, we'd love to see some of these bills pass. But we're going to have our hands full protecting these iconic landscapes in the future. And one of those is the Cascade-Siskiyou. And I just encourage everyone to keep paying attention because we do know Project 2025 has called out Oregon public lands directly as a target for the new administration. And so I just wanted to share that with everyone else that while KS Wild's focused on some permanent protection bills, we're also going to have our hands full defending these places into the future. And I think I just want to say thanks to Sammy, Oregon Wild, Chandra, Mark as well for this opportunity to share what's happening down here with you all. If you want to learn more about KS Wild, you can check us out on our website. There's the URL below, www.kswild.org. And I encourage any of you that want to get out and explore Oregon's public lands. One of my favorite rivers for wildlife is the Wild Rogue. This is a picture a friend and I took a few years ago of a big, fat, plump bear down the Wild Rogue. So if you want to see bears, otters, eagles, salmon, go check out the Wild Rogue for a fun little river trip.
All right, thank you, Michael. And now, hang on, I messed this up. All right, here we go. I'd like to hand it off to Chandra LeGue, Senior Conservation Advocate with Oregon Wild, who will be talking about the River Democracy Act tonight. All right, Chandra, go ahead.
All right, thanks so much. We'll be talking about the River Democracy Act, why it's important and where does it stand, for the context tonight. Go ahead, Sammy. Many of you know me, I've been on these webinars many times, so you know that I'm more of a forest person, not so much a river rat, but my personal love of hiking and exploring in forests all over Oregon means that I'm often along rivers. So rivers for Oregon Wild have been a big part of our campaign portfolio over our 50-year history, not just wilderness, and forests and wildlife. The rivers tie it all together, and I recognize that even if I'm not, even if I'm usually have my feet on the trail and not my boat in the river. So we're gonna first talk about the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, because that's where the River Democracy Act falls. Go ahead, Sammy. So backing up just a little bit, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is a law that was passed in 1968, so not quite 60 years old, and established a national wild and scenic river system to preserve free-flowing rivers that have exceptional values. And rivers can be added to this system through acts of Congress. So by designating a protective buffer on each side of all of the protected streams, these streams are values that are defined for each stream are protected. So that corridor can be, under the 1968 Act, is a 1/4 mile on either side of streams, but there's some exceptions to that I'll get into. And this is just for public lands, or rivers that flow through public lands, does not impact private land management at all. Next slide. So under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, there's plenty of existing uses and access are still allowed, as well as active restoration activities and firefighting and fuel fire risk reduction. That can all still take place in Wild and Scenic River corridors. So it doesn't mean hands off, but the idea is that activities that degrade the values of a designated river are not allowed. So things like new dams and new mining claims or other oil and gas extraction in many areas, and I'll get more into that too, are not allowed under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. So in general, it's a really powerful and good tool for river protection that's been used across the country, for 55 years. All right, next slide. So Oregon is no stranger to wild and scenic rivers. Michael was just talking about the Wild Rogue. In fact, we have 2,173 miles of designated wild and scenic rivers in Oregon currently, and you can see those in blue on this map of Oregon. These include some of our most iconic rivers and landscapes, from the Wild Rogue to the Metolius, and out in Eastern Oregon, the Imnaha and the John Day. Some of these were actually designated under the original Wild and Scenic Rivers Act legislation, and many were added in a big bill that passed Congress back in 1988. Some more have been added since then, usually packaged with other wilderness and public lands bills. Next slide. So our congressional delegation is pretty familiar with the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act tool. And so with the River Democracy Act, developed by Senator Wyden, he and Senator Markley, who's co-sponsored it, they weren't afraid to go big. So the River Democracy Act proposes to add, to actually more than double our current protected river system in Oregon, adding 3,200 miles across the state in some really vitally important areas. Next slide. Oh, actually, go back. Sorry, Sammy. I should point out that on this map, the current wild and scenic rivers are purple, and the blue lines all over that map are the streams that are proposed for protection under the River Democracy Act. It's hard to soak it all in so many lines on a map, but so we, of course, know how special Oregon rivers are, and not just those main stems of the iconic rivers that, like so many that are already protected. We've got endangered native fish populations that depend on undammed rivers that have healthy and protected public lands surrounding them. Most Oregonians get their drinking water from streams that originate on public lands. And under the River Democracy Act, more than 1 million people in Oregon stand to gain increased drinking water protections. Of course, our rivers provide amazing recreation opportunities. Michael was and Mark were both mentioning that. And often in places that are rural and where the communities depend on that recreation for their economies. And then, of course, we have wild rivers and streams that run through wild landscapes. So connecting wildlife habitat, protecting biodiversity, and mitigating climate change. So all sorts of reasons why protecting more rivers across Oregon is important. So what makes this particular piece of legislation important? Well, the River Democracy Act was indeed developed using democracy. Senator Wyden put out a call to the public to nominate rivers and streams that they would like to see protected under a new Wild and Scenic Rivers bill. This is kind of born out of a competition that he has with Senator Murkowski in Alaska. He wanted to surpass Alaska for having more wild and scenic rivers. We'll take his reasoning, it's fine, despite all the other reasons that we know it's important. But he engaged the public over the course of 6 months to a year, back in 2019 and 2020. And a coalition, including all of us on this call here, or presenting here tonight, and many other organizations, was born to help support this bill and support the public in submitting nominations. And so over 15,000 nominations came in from over 2,000 people to develop this bill. Senator Wyden also was involving tribes on a parallel track as he developed the River Democracy Act. Another reason that this bill is unique and important, and you can go to the next slide, Sammy, is the sheer size of the bill. We've got some major conservation gains coming out of this bill. With more than 3,000 miles of rivers and streams, that's amazing. And it comes with these protected corridors that are managed to preserve river values. And in this case, all of the proposed streams get a half-mile corridor or buffer on each side of the stream. So picture mile-wide corridors snaking across the state on more than 3,000 miles of vital waterways, and you get an idea of the importance that this has for wildlife, for fish, and for ecosystems. Many of these protections are also in headwater streams, tributaries to the big iconic rivers, which have been shown to have really huge importance for regulating water temperature and flow and holding, and that have important habitat. And the River Democracy Act protects all designated streams, not just wild streams. It's kind of a technical term for under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, rivers can be designated as wild, scenic, or recreational. And under that act, just wild rivers get mineral withdrawals. And as Michael was explaining, mineral withdrawals are a really important way of protecting streams from new mining development. And under the RDA, all of these streams gain that protection, which is amazing. So another way of getting that protection in addition to the streams that Michael was talking about in Southwest Oregon. Next slide. And along with those conservation gains I just mentioned, this bill aligns with climate goals, climate and biodiversity goals, that scientists are highlighting. So this map might be a little busy, but basically the purple areas on the map are identified by local scientists as important for preserving biodiversity and mitigating climate change. And a lot of our blue wild and scenic rivers that are proposed in the River Democracy Act overlap with those areas. That's the key thing I want you to take away. All right, next slide. Another unique thing about the RDA is that it has wide-ranging support. I wouldn't necessarily call it bipartisan because Representative Benz doesn't support it, but we've got endorsements from hundreds of businesses, breweries, elected officials, scientists, local organizations, and polling shows that the vast majority of Oregonians want to see increased river protections like this. And through the work of our coalition, including ONDA and KS Wild, we have seen enthusiastic support from the public as well. So in doing all sorts of grassroots engagement over the past 4 years, many of you have probably who are on this webinar have probably taken some of these actions. We've had many letters to the editor submitted, people showing up at town hall meetings to voice their support, showing, sending in postcards, lobbying their representatives, and taking out full page ads in the case of this brewery ad in the newspapers. So people are really excited about this bill. Next slide. Because yeah, what's not to like? It protects drinking water, fish and wildlife habitat, mitigates climate change, helps our economies, and protects places we love to recreate. So we've been all geared up to make this happen over the last couple of years, and it looks like we're going to have to wait a little longer. So next slide. So the River Democracy Act was first introduced in 2021, and it did have a Senate hearing that year. Then it kind of sat for a little bit. Senator Wyden revised the bill and reduced the original number of river miles, and then it was finally reintroduced just this summer. But it hasn't had a hearing, and that's one of the barriers for being included in these lame duck sessions and omnibus public lands bills. And so for now, we're going to wait on the River Democracy Act. Hopefully in 2 years, we can try again. Next slide. So while we wait for an avenue for this bill to move forward in Congress, we're going to have some challenges. For lots of different reasons. So despite having strong support, the River Democracy Act has always had some opposition. So we're going to have to continue to deal with those mining, logging interests in particular. We also have a new administration where congressional and cabinet level leaders may be pretty opposed to public lands and waters protections. So we're going to have to play defense to ensure that the streams and other waters included in RDA aren't damaged or degraded by mining and logging and other management plans that are developed in the next few years. This picture here is of Rough and Ready Creek, which Michael mentioned, and it's just an amazing place that is threatened by mining. The top picture is of a timber sale on the Malheur National Forest that is within the proposed river corridor for protection. And we're going to see more logging projects like that probably coming online. So we're going to have to be pushing back against those. And, it can be difficult to maintain momentum, both at the grassroots level, but also with our congressional champions when bills like these are postponed. I can say from experience with the Devil's Staircase Wilderness effort, for example, that, that was a 10-year push, reintroduced over and over again in Congress until it finally passed in 2019. It takes a lot of creativity and patience and perseverance with all these various tactics to pass that legislation. But we've got that experience, with the Wild Road too, coming back year after year and keeping it up. We know that Senator Wyden really believes in this bill, and so we're just going to have to remind him regularly over the next few years to make sure that the River Democracy gets passed as soon as we have the opportunity to do so. Next slide. So in the meantime, we're gonna ask you to keep up that pressure, keep supporting river protections, write those letters to the editors, send in your postcards, send a note to Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley and your House representatives, and enjoy those rivers and streams so that you can say why you want them protected, and that'll help us keep up that grassroots pressure. So thanks to everyone who's already done that, and I look forward to working on this for hopefully only a few more years to come, but we're in it for the long haul on the River Democracy Act. Thanks, Sammy.
All right, thank you to all of our speakers, Mark, Chandra, Michael. That was amazing, and thank you all, for your work and your efforts to continue protecting iconic landscapes in Oregon. So we'll get to Q&A in just a few moments. So for everyone out there, last chance to submit your questions, and just a reminder, you can use that Q&A function that you should see on your screen. Just type in your questions there. But first, I just have a couple closing thoughts, and then we'll get to Q&A. So as we mentioned throughout the presentations, this lame duck session now is our best and biggest opportunity, at least in the near term, until the midterms in 2 years, to get some of these things done. But it will also be really important to push back against some bad public lands bills that some anti-environmental interests are trying to push and get included in a public lands package as well. So one glaring example that I need to mention is the so-called Fix Our Forests Act, which in fact has nothing to do at all with protecting forests. It would instead eliminate a lot of protections for forests. So this bill does a lot of pretty terrible things, including some large-scale rollbacks of important environmental laws, such as the Endangered Species Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. And this would be across, millions of acres of public lands. So pretty bad. Unfortunately, that has passed the House somewhat recently. So now we need our senators to stand strong and oppose this bill and oppose its inclusion in any potential public lands package. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. I do, though, want to end on a bit of hope and optimism, which I know may be hard to come by these days. But many of you may be surprised to learn that the last wilderness that was actually designated in Oregon, the Devil's Staircase out in the Coast Range, that was protected in 2019, of course, during the first Trump administration, and it happened after the 2018 midterms. The Democrats flipped the House, so we had a split Congress. Democrats controlled the House, Republicans controlled the Senate. Of course, Trump was in the White House, but even against those odds, we're able to protect this pretty important very ecologically important place, and we're also to get other conservation wins in there too. So yeah, it is possible. The next 2 years, like the panelists mentioned, might be difficult. We might be playing defense a lot, but there are still some of those opportunities out there, and we need to be ready when that opportunity does arise to protect some of these places. And we do that, by continuing to pressure our members of Congress, telling them to prioritize protecting these iconic landscapes. And to do that, we do those things that Chandra just mentioned, reaching out to them, emailing them, calling them, sending them postcards, writing letters to the editor helps a lot. Anything like that, just make sure that it's top of mind for them. All right, well, let's get into all of your questions. Hang on. All right, first question. I think anyone can take a stab at this. So Darlene asks, all these bills have been around for a while. Why do you think Republican House of Representatives would vote for this when they have a trifecta Congress and the White House? Anyone have a good answer for that?
I could try, because if a federal public lands package were to move, it would likely include Senator Ron Wyden's Owyhee legislation. But again, developments happen daily, and you'd be surprised at 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 both the progress or failure, the regression that these legislative efforts can take just on a daily, even hourly basis. There is interest in this current Congress, and especially on the Senate side, to enact a package of bills that, as the Inquirer noted, have been around a long time. That package could include literally dozens of pieces of legislation, many, if not most of them, promoting protections for public lands, waters, and wildlife across the country, but unfortunately also bills that would set back conservation on those same, forests, grasslands, and deserts. And so it is a complex sort of political calculation, which bills are included in a package, how the different legislative offices, the leadership of each party negotiates that bill, what ultimately comprises that sort of final omnibus proposal. And honestly, we may not, it's probably more likely than not that a package does not pass, but it's possible because we're coming to an end of a Congress. These legislators, part of this Congress, have been talking about it for some time. And if the Senate can put together a bill that works for Democrats and Republicans in that chamber, there's probably enough votes in the House to enact it as sent over by the Senate to the House of Representatives. And so, but again, the intelligence from Washington, D.C. on whether and how this package is moving differs every day. And until this Congress adjourns, and I understand that they're looking at December 23rd, so we will literally be working up to 2 days before the holiday. We won't really truly know until something finally begins to move, and it may happen quickly. And we all will do all that we can to keep up with it, and hopefully it'll do more good than bad for public lands conservation in Oregon and nationwide.
Thanks, Mark. Another question that could be for anyone. If the federal legislation doesn't go through, what local and state options do we have?
Sammy, to our issue in Southwest Oregon, that's a good question. We actually just testified last week, KS Wild and others, at a DEQ hearing. And so one of the things that DEQ in Oregon is considering is we have these Clean Water Act designations that the state can designate outstanding resource waters. And it's a standard that helps protect water quality in special waterways. And there's a small handful already. Crater Lake, Waldo Lake, and the North Fork Smith River are already ORWs. And for us down here, knowing that, like what Mark says, the chance that these bills pass could be less than 50-50. And so we have to sort of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And one of the things we can do for us on the local level is look at places like the Wild and Scenic Illinois River, Rough and Ready Creek, these special waterways with high water quality, recreation, good fish habitat. They could be eligible for ORWs.
Yeah, there's also a mechanism for designating state scenic waterways in Oregon that has been used in the past, kind of almost as there's some overlap certainly with the Wild and Scenic River proposal that we have out there now, but can designate lands that are rivers that flow through non-federal public lands. It hasn't been used as a large scale tool. And I'm not familiar enough with, how easy it is or hard it is to get that get that through the state legislature. So it's probably not, it wouldn't be a replacement for something like the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and the River Democracy Act. But some other tools for getting, some interim protections, at both the state and federal level, using the Endangered Species Act to protect habitat the best we can. Call me naive, but I don't think that the new administration's gonna gut every environmental law that we have to work with on the federal level right away. So that's the federal agencies that manage our public lands can be pretty slow to change, actually. And so I think we have that working in our favor, and environmental law is still on the books. So passing these laws, of course, is our end goal a lot of times, but we do have other tools and other laws to use.
Great. Next question, can you say any more about what Project 2025 says regarding Oregon wildlands? I know Michael answered part of this, talking about the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. Does anyone else know of any other things?
I try not to read that propaganda.
I'm the same.
I'm going to say not good.
Page 532 in Project 2025. I can just tell you because I highlighted it in our dinner in Gala 2 weeks ago, but that specifically is Department of Interior section. And it just goes to talk about wanting to roll back, the Cascade-Siskiyou, which has been attempted, but we, beat that back this year with the SCOTUS ruling in favor of the monument. So we'll see what happens. And it also just points to other Western Oregon BLM forests as, prioritizing timber management over anything else.
All right, and this is probably for Chandra or Michael. Is the half-mile or mile buffer, assuming for wild and scenic rivers, is that enough for mining operations to not spoil the waterways?
I don't know enough about mining, Michael. I don't know if you do, but it'd have to be a really big mining operation, I imagine. And they have to jump through a lot of hoops in order to get permitting for big operations like that would have that kind of impact.
Yeah, and my understanding too, Chandra, is that the buffers are very much a part of the baseline Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, that it's just sort of standard wherever it goes. I think you could ask for more, but yeah, it's just sort of a standard distance for those waterways, which is why the mineral withdrawal bills focus on not just the edges of the water, but the mineral withdrawal does focus on acreage upland from waterways too.
Great. And for Mark, I assume this is about the Owyhee, but does, I guess, either legislation or monument, does it include the issue of livestock overgrazing? If not, why not?
Good question. The legislation sort of set the mold, if you will, for both the Senate, the Senate proposal, but also what could be included in a national monument designation by elevating the standard by which grazing will be measured and adjusted on all 4.5 million acres of public lands in Malheur County, recognizing that livestock grazing is a major factor in sort of the most pervasive land use on that landscape, affecting wildlife, habitat, watersheds, etc. And that is the legislation, and again, we've advocated that a monument proclamation could include the same, would elevate the land health standard for the Owyhee Canyonlands, so that all activities, livestock grazing and other activities achieve long-term ecological health of the landscape. And that is an important and unique measure that you will not find most anywhere else on Bureau of Land Management public lands. It is a much sort of higher bar, if you will, for grazing management than rangeland health standards that are typical of most of these landscapes and what is being used now on the Owyhee Canyon. So we're hopeful that this new standard, long-term ecological health, will actually lead to improved livestock grazing on that landscape wherever grazing might continue in the Canyonlands. Admittedly, it is the most widespread use in the Owyhee Canyonlands, and politically, it is extremely difficult to reduce or eliminate livestock grazing, but we were able to work with ranchers to produce sort of a new management paradigm for the Owyhee Canyonlands as part of our discussions that led to the bill.
Great, and we are just about at time, so I want to thank all of our speakers again for joining tonight, and thank all of you in the audience for joining us tonight. Hope you learned something, and again, you know, it might be a hard next couple years, but you know, that's the reason why Oregon Wild, ONDA, KS Wild is around to defend our public lands against the threats to them. So I hope you all have a great rest of your night, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.